This is On Base, your one-stop shop for solving your most pressing B2B go-to-market challenges. Each week, hosts Chris Moody and Paul Gibson talk to sales and marketing leaders to get you in-depth insights and creative strategies to set your revenue teams up for success.
Hey everyone, welcome back to On Base. I'm your host, Chris Moody, and today I'm very excited to talk to Peter Bregman on why MQLs are a terrible metric. This is something we're really passionate about. We were just talking before we hit the record button. But Peter, thanks for joining us today. I'd love for you to tell everyone a little bit about yourself, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about my background. So I actually started out almost 20 years ago now as an audio engineer. So this is kind of coming back to that world for me. And then at the time, I had a recording studio. I had also a guitar pedal company. So I was just kind of running my own thing. I was doing some freelance marketing on the side. And then during the '08 crash, the audio industry basically died. And so I leaned more into marketing, started working with some agencies, started doing some digital creative work. And right around at the time, marketing automation as a concept was starting to take off. This was, I think Marketo had only launched like the year before. Eloqua was pretty new. So the concept of marketing automation was still kind of a new idea. And this idea for me that I could take these assets I've been working so hard on and not just email them out, but email them out. And then if people didn't look at them, you could automatically send it again. The most basic part of automation, that was new and that was awesome. And so all of a sudden being able to look at that and look at engagement and look at, whether these things were making a difference and what kind of messaging was landing, all of that was just beginning to kind of bubble up. And then right around the same time, CRM, which, had been around for a little while, but not that long, was just starting to really take off as well. This was back when, I don't know if you remember when Salesforce was still doing their campaign where it was like software in a cloud with a line through it.
Yep.
Because everyone had everything installed on-prem. Like that's even just in '08, '09, that was still the way most companies were. So going to SaaS was still pretty new at the time. I started working for some agencies. I started working then for a bunch of SaaS companies as that was taking off and some smaller software companies. Ran a bunch of demand gen teams out of those. So had the experience of building up demand gen teams from nothing, standing up stacks from nothing. And then eventually moved kind of to the opposite end of the spectrum, really big corporate. I went to 3M, and at 3M, I owned the MarTech integrations and stack for the entire org. So it was at the time 26 divisions, over 40 countries. It was a massive deployment. I was told at the time we had the largest Salesforce deployment in the planet. It was huge, and we were using Eloqua, which was a massive deployment of Eloqua as well. So super complex environment, lots of really interesting opportunities, though, to learn about a lot of really different go-to-market models. Because at 3M, we sold everything from like literally Post-it notes to industrial chemicals to healthcare supplies to you name it. We were in every industry. So it was a little bit like being within an agency, within a giant corporation. A fascinating experience. From there, I went to C.H. Robinson, which was the largest logistics company in the world. And we had a similar group of different prospects that we were going after. We had some of the carriers. It was almost a B2C type relationship. And then we had a bunch of shippers where it was much more B2B, and then a whole bunch of other variations. And there I was called the Senior Director of Digital Automation and Engagement. And it was a little bit of a combination of sort of, I think a lot of companies would call it RevOps along with go-to-market strategy. So that's kind of the background. And then from there, more recently, I've moved back into consulting. So now I'm helping companies start or restart their growth engines by really getting their marketing and sales and service and potentially product groups aligned to their go-to-market strategy, and then making sure that they have the right tools and teams to meet their goals.
Love that. Yeah, your journey brought back a lot of memories for me too. I was part of Eloqua's acquisition of Compendium as Oracle bought Eloqua. So it was kind of a shell game that started the marketing cloud. So everything you were saying, I was like, oh, I remember where I was when this happened. Yeah. I remember all the logos. Yeah. So I'd love to dive in to MQLs being problematic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth just for a second. I don't think MQLs will ever go away, but I completely agree with you that it's not the best metric. So I'd love for you to discuss a little bit about, what's the problem with marketing qualified leads and how should people be thinking about it today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say, sort of as a caveat right off the bat, mostly we're just talking about B2B, sort of medium to large deal sizes. I mean, there's always more e-commerce plays for smaller deals or B2C, et cetera. So there's a couple different, models out there. But for B2B and for medium to large deal sizes, I don't think MQL is a great metric. And it's funny, I looked it up. MQL as an idea was really popularized by Serious Decisions before they were acquired by Forrester with their demand waterfall back in 2002. So the MQL is now at least 22 years old. It's a metric. It can drink. It's an old metric. And I think the biggest issue with it is that it's kind of built on this idea that marketing and sales are totally separate groups, and that marketing's purpose is to generate leads and just fill the funnel. And then sales is supposed to close it. And I think, we know, those of us who've been working in a lot of organizations, we know that that's not how things actually work. Quality matters way more than quantity. Prospects have to be at the right place in their buying cycle. The ideal customer profile has to really match. And generating a whole bunch of leads is really just resulting in bad conversion metrics, distrust between marketing and sales. And ultimately, I think it's resulting in a lot of the marketing budget cuts we've been seeing lately, because there's this idea that marketing success was pegged to the MQL, and the MQL conversion rates have been dropping. And a lot of leaders that maybe aren't as familiar with other things that marketing does looks at that and says, marketing's failing. I'm going to cut their budget. And so it's put marketing in a bad place, and it's also just put the entire, go-to-market team in a bad place, because that's not the main purpose of marketing, is to just generate leads.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Even attribution fights really started with MQLs because it's, first touch, multi-touch, last touch. A lot of the conversation, it's based on what we're really trying to infer and learn. So I agree with you there. If we start to parse out, what should we do about this? So we know a lot of B2B organizations still track MQLs. They still view it as a measure of success, especially in a lot of sales teams. So they're saying like, hey, we need more leads. We need more high quality leads. They're saying things that are getting at what we should be doing, but it may be using the wrong terminology. So what would be your first step to say, hey, okay, let's solve the MQL problem. Step one, what do we replace MQLs with?
And see, I think that's a dangerous game to play, because I think there's really a broader issue underlying all of this. And that's that I think demand generation, or even lead generation, is sort of a flawed concept to begin with. None of us are generating demand, right? All we're doing is identifying potential demand and then working to educate those prospects on why they should buy from us. And I like to think of the idea that there's really only three groups of people that anyone can target. There's the first group, which is people that need a product like yours and they know it. So your job as a marketer or a salesperson is to just position your product or service against your competition while hopefully providing the best customer experience you can. The second group is people who need a product like yours but don't know it. So your job there is education, make them aware of the problem your product solves and show how your product solves that problem. Then there's the third group, which is people who don't have a need for a product like yours. Nobody should be marketing or selling to that group. It's a waste of time and resources. Even if you make a sale, we all know some people who can sell sand on the beach. But you're going to end up with a bad customer experience, churn, wasted time. It's going to be bad for everybody. And the problem is that the idea of generating demand and generating leads, you end up with a lot of that third category, which is people who are not the right people to be selling to, and we're spending all this time trying to sell to them. So I think, you'll notice this is starting to sound a lot like account-based marketing, because that was the natural direction things needed to move in. I think at this point, most people agree that account-based marketing, or ABM, was sort of a terrible name because of the word marketing, and it really put everything kind of in a box and scared away a lot of leaders. So there was that move to ABX, or I even heard Drift, I think, is saying ABE, engagement. Either way, I think it's definitely a move in the right direction. It can still be a little bit confusing just because it's all about just being account-based. I am more on board with the more recent discussion about things in terms of revenue operations or go-to-market. I think that those are better names, and the concept alludes more to that combination of marketing and sales and potentially service and product all in one group. Because I think if we just say, for example, marketing qualified accounts are the new MQLs, MQAs, right? The problem is that allows people to sort of just account wash their demand waterfall. So they just make it about marketing is now generating MQAs and throwing them over to sales. So it's a slightly different metric, but we're doing the same thing and it's still a broken process. So I don't know that there is a metric to replace MQLs. I think what you need to do is kind of get back to the basics. You obviously need to develop a really good ideal customer profile. You need to understand the customer journey. You need to understand the positioning. Then you need to go and target those ideal customer profiles, be really specific, use content with value props that appeal to them. And you're doing two things in my mind as marketing. You're identifying where these people who meet the ICP are in their customer journey. Are they becoming aware of the problem? Are they already aware? Are they researching? Are they ready to buy? And then second, you're educating them enough to move them to the next stage. So it's not about generating MQLs or MQAs even. It's about working with sales and service to identify where in the journey these people are and help educate them to, become or stay a customer. It should all be customer-centric. And I think that's the main thing, is to figure out how you can measure that. Usually it's engagement and or intent and some sort of metric saying how much they match the ideal customer profile. And then you need to just be armed with the right value props and battle cards to address that.
Love it. I think you hit on the impact there. I think you hit on how to get started. A lot of that conversation is working with sales to have the right dialogue and then lock arms, tell the story together. That's how you can start to make the transition. So great
Absolutely.
way to package that up there. One thing we hear a lot about, which is somewhat related because it's always going to come back to ROI, but I'd love to hear how you're thinking about AI and using AI in marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, AI is obviously here to stay at this point. I would say from what I've seen, it is absolutely best when it's used to help people, not replace them. So I think this idea of, potentially replacing SDRs with kind of virtual AI, I don't think that works very well. I think people can spot a fake. People are already getting inundated with poorly written AI messages. It doesn't work. I think instead, using tools to arm SDRs and make them more intelligent, that is already working really well. I think about some of the things that Gong is doing. Clay is a super interesting tool. I mean, demand-based, being able to give that kind of account-based insights to the SDR team is super powerful. So I think those kinds of tools are going to be something that makes a big difference. I'm currently working now on the product side with a startup called Atomic Elevator, and we're building a tool that helps companies nail down their ICPs and positioning and value props and go-to-market strategy and all of that so they can have a cohesive strategy to go to market with. I think that's another place where AI can really help people generate that strategy that can be difficult to come up with. But I think no matter what, you need a specific use case or problem to solve first, and then you need enough data to build a good prompt or training set. If you don't have those two things, AI is not going to do anything for you, because that's all AI is going to do is take your input and give you an output. So you got to have a specific output in mind, and you have to have enough data to put on the input. And I would say in general, you still always put the customer first. Think about what their experience is going to be.
Love that. Yeah, always put the customers first. I mean, let's put that in bold, italics, flashing on your screen like the old HTML websites we used to build. Yeah, I mean, I do see a lot of folks just using AI to use AI, and it's not always putting the customer first and how does this benefit? And half the time it's even, well, our competitors are doing this, and completely loses the human element. So I think that's great. One audience question that we've had a lot recently is about sales development reps, business development reps, SDRs, BDRs, whatever you like to prefer. Should SDRs report to marketing instead of sales? I'd love to get your take on that.
That's a really interesting question. I would say in small orgs, yeah, it can work really well. I mean, I'm a big believer in RevOps and unifying customer-facing teams in general. I've had the experience of hiring and training and managing inside sales teams, and it's worked really well. I like the idea of aligning the outreach teams, especially for the kind of customers and prospects in the awareness and research stages. I think that can work really, really well. I do think in really large orgs that can get difficult, and there's going to need to be alignment between the SDRs or inside sales and then any field sales or outside sales that exist in the company. So depending on how they're comped and how they're organized, I see all sorts of different ways of organizing these teams. I think the biggest thing is to make sure that there's a super tight alignment between marketing and sales, marketing and inside sales especially. even if they don't report into the same org, they should be having regular meetings. I mean, at least have, biweekly or weekly meetings with these groups so you can stay on the same page and be aligned strategically.
Great feedback there. Love that. And then we're starting to ask a survey question every time we do an episode too, because, hey, we're all marketers. Let's just call it what it is. This is a great way to aggregate information, create new content. But we love asking, what's the biggest challenge you have in B2B marketing? And, there are 6 choices here. I can rattle them off really quickly. So we have aligning sales and marketing, adopting account-based marketing or account-based experiences or account-based engagement, whatever the term is, you know what we mean there. Yep. Personalizing at scale is number 3. Creating engaging content is number 4. Measuring ROI is number 5. Or number 6, orchestrating campaigns across channels.
Those are all things that need lots of attention. I think in keeping with my theme, I would say aligning in sales and marketing. I think that that's foundational to all of the rest of the things you mentioned, especially just aligning them around a shared go-to-market strategy and a set of goals makes a big difference.
Love that too. All right, we're in the home stretch here. This is our lightning round. We have 3 quick hitting questions here. The first we call good reads. Is there a book, blog, newsletter, or podcast that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I'm actually just started reading a book. It just came out that's super interesting called Invisible Rulers by Renee DeResta. Super fascinating. She was a researcher in communications and social media for many, many years. And the book is kind of about the ways that influence and ideas spread on the internet and kind of taking a look at how social media has evolved to change people's minds about all sorts of things. She talks a lot about this idea of bespoke realities that are created by everybody's individual feeds. And it's funny because even on something like LinkedIn, you'll see this. Like if you read and write a lot about B2B marketing or go-to-markets, you'll see all of that in your feed over and over again. You're creating your own little bespoke reality. So it's a pretty fascinating read. And then there's a couple podcasts that are pretty high level, but I really enjoy. I really like Planet Money, which it's an entertaining economics podcast, even though that sounds like an oxymoron. I promise it is. I also really like Hard Fork, which is sort of a state of technology podcast that usually has a lot of good information about what's happening right now. And then interestingly, First Round Capital, which is one of the VC companies that really starts a lot of companies out when they're really at the beginning seed round. It's called In Depth. They do interviews with founders, which is always interesting and I think applies even to very large organizations.
Great suggestions there. The next quick hitter we call Good People. Who inspires you in the B2B space that you think we should bring to the show?
That's a great question as well. I would say I've really been finding a lot of the stuff that Tiffany Gonzalez has been writing about interesting. So she runs RevOps at Microsoft, and she's been talking a lot about kind of complex sales and marketing issues as well as metrics. Obviously at Microsoft, there's a lot of complexities in their sales cycle there. So it's been interesting to see some of the stuff she's been writing. And then, another person who's been writing a lot of great stuff is Charlie Liang. And there's kind of a connection with Demandbase there because he was once upon a time the head of marketing for Engagio, which was a tool that I used many, many years ago that got acquired by Demandbase. And he, I think, went from there to Lattice. And I think now he's VP at Kula. But he talks a lot about go-to-market strategy, engagement, MarTech, outbound, all of that. So lots of great things there. And then the last one, I think, is a little different. A woman named Abby Kelsey, she specializes in helping companies do social selling, specifically on LinkedIn for B2B companies, which I think is something that's becoming more and more important. I mean, LinkedIn has always been important, but for B2B, it's really becoming one of the main platforms for selling these days. And I think that she's providing a pretty awesome service in helping companies navigate that, not just from like a personal brand perspective, but B2B, how do you sell on LinkedIn?
Great people there. We'll be sure to reach out to all of them. And then the most important question, Peter, how can people get in touch with you after the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they can find me on LinkedIn, of course. Also, my consultancy is called Digital Adaptive. So if they go to digital-adaptive.com or email me at peter@digitaladaptive.com, they can get a hold of me.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for your time and the great episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for On Base. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share, rate, review, and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. The show is brought to you by Demandbase, the only account-based experience platform built for sales and marketing alignment.